What made you finally realize that the problem child of your family deserved better? My sister Danielle was 6 years older than me and the biggest troublemaker our family ever had. Always getting suspended from school, stealing money from mom's purse, screaming at everyone over nothing. By the time I was 8, every birthday party we threw was for me, my brother Tyler, or my cousin Jake. Never Danielle. When I asked why, Mom would roll her eyes and say, Danielle didn't deserve celebrations because she acted out too much. Sometimes she'd add that Danielle was grounded or didn't want to party anyway. I believed that for years. Danielle would just sit in her room on her birthday while we ate cake downstairs. I thought she was being dramatic when she cried about it. Last month, I turned 18 and wanted to make a photo album for graduation. I went digging through old pictures in Mom's closet looking for baby photos. That's when I noticed something weird. There were tons of birthday pictures of me and Tyler every year, but Danielle stopped completely after she turned 6. Before that, there were normal party photos with balloons and cake. After 6, nothing. I asked Mom about it while she was folding laundry. Where are Danielle's birthday pictures from when she was older? She didn't even look up from the towels. I told you she didn't deserve them. She started acting out around that age. Something felt off. I called my Aunt Beth, who always had loose lips after a few drinks. Aunt Beth, do you remember why Danielle's birthday stopped when she was little? There was this long pause. Then she whispered, Honey, you should ask your sister about what happened with Rick. Rick was this family friend who used to babysit us sometimes. I barely remembered him because he stopped coming around when I was really young. That night, I cornered Danielle in her room. She was 24 now, working at a gas station and still living at home because she could barely afford anything else. Danielle, what happened with Rick when you were 6? Her face went completely white. She started shaking and told me to get out, but I kept pushing. Please, I need to know. Why did your birthday stop? That's when she broke down, crying harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry. She told me everything. How Rick had touched her inappropriately multiple times when he babysat. How she tried to tell Mom and Dad what he did. Instead of believing her, they called her a liar and said she was making up stories for attention. They thought she was acting out because she was jealous of me being born. So they canceled her 7th birthday party as punishment for lying about Rick. Every year after that, they'd find some excuse. She was grounded for bad grades. She didn't want to party anyway. She was being ungrateful. By the time she was 10, she'd given up trying to tell anyone what really happened. The acting out got worse because she felt like no one would ever believe her or protect her. The stealing, the screaming, even the drugs she got into in high school. It all made sense now. She wasn't a problem child. She was a hurt child that nobody listened to. I felt sick thinking about all those birthdays where we celebrated downstairs while she cried alone upstairs. All those times I called her dramatic or crazy. All those times our parents called her the problem when they were the ones who failed her. That weekend, I told Tyler everything and we decided to fix this. We gathered our cousins, some of her old friends from work, even her current boyfriend, who she'd been scared to bring around our toxic family. We rented the community center and bought the biggest cake they had. When we brought Danielle there that Saturday, she saw the decorations and immediately started crying. It's not even my birthday, she said. It's every birthday you should have had, I told her. We had photos from all the years she missed printed out and put them on a timeline. Signs that said, Happy 7th birthday, Danielle, all the way up to, Happy 24th birthday, Danielle. She cried through the whole thing, but this time they were good tears. For the first time in 18 years, someone listened when she spoke. My sister Danielle was 6 years older than me and easily the biggest troublemaker our family had ever seen. She was always getting suspended from school, sneaking money from Mom's purse, and yelling at anyone over the smallest things. By the time I turned 8, every birthday party in our house was for me, my brother Tyler, or my cousin Jake, never Danielle. Whenever I asked Mom why Danielle wasn't celebrated, she would just roll her eyes and say, Danielle didn't deserve celebrations because she acted out too much. Sometimes she'd say Danielle was grounded or didn't want to party anyway. I believed her for years. Danielle would just cry quietly in her room while we ate cake downstairs. I thought she was just being dramatic. Last month, turning 18, I decided to make a photo album for graduation. Digging through Mom's closet for baby pictures, I noticed something strange. Tons of pictures of me and Tyler's birthdays, but after Danielle turned 6, there were no birthday photos of her. Before 6, there were colorful parties, balloons, and cakes. After 6, nothing. I asked Mom about it while she folded laundry. Without looking up, she said, I told you she didn't deserve them. That answer felt wrong. I called my Aunt Beth, who tends to overshare after a few drinks. She paused, then whispered, "You should ask Danielle about what happened with Rick." Rick was a family friend who babysat us when we were young. I barely remembered him since he stopped coming when I was little. That night, I confronted Danielle in her room. Now 24, working at a gas station and still living at home because she could barely afford anything else. Her face turned pale, she shook and told me to leave. But I kept pushing. "Please, I need to know. Why did your birthday stop?" She broke down crying harder than I'd ever seen. Danielle revealed everything. How Rick had inappropriately touched her multiple times while babysitting, how she tried to tell Mom and Dad. Instead of believing her, they accused her of lying for attention and jealousy over my birth. Her 7th birthday party was canceled as punishment for making up stories. Every year afterward, they found excuses to avoid celebrating her. Bad grades, grounding claims she didn't want to party, being ungrateful. By 10, she had given up telling anyone. The acting out worsened. Stealing, screaming, drugs, because she felt abandoned and unheard. It hit me like a punch. Danielle wasn't a problem child. She was a hurt child ignored by the ones who should have protected her. I felt sick thinking about every birthday we celebrated downstairs while she cried alone upstairs. Every time I called her dramatic or crazy. Every time our parents blamed her when they had failed her. That weekend, I told Tyler, and we decided to fix this. We gathered cousins, her old coworkers, and even her boyfriend, who she had been too scared to bring near our toxic family. We rented the community center and bought the biggest cake we could find. When Danielle arrived on that Saturday, she saw the decorations and began to cry. "It's not even my birthday," she whispered. "It's every birthday you should have had," I told her. We had a timeline of photos from every missed year. Signs saying "Happy 7th birthday, Danielle" up to "Happy 24th birthday. Danielle." She cried through the whole event, but these were healing tears. For the first time in 18 years, someone truly listened when Danielle spoke. Story 2, at an elite family dinner, my wife's father, the CEO, mocked my small business. He can't even afford a proper office. He's my daughter's biggest mistake. His biggest client stood up. "Actually, that's my son." I smiled as my father-in-law's face turned white because he had no idea. Chapter 1. The dinner. The chandeliers sparkled above the long mahogany table, polished to perfection. The waiters glided between guests, pouring wine that probably cost more than a month's rent. This wasn't just dinner. It was a performance. My wife's family loved to remind me of my place. Her father, Richard, the towering CEO of a multinational conglomerate, sat at the head of the table. His silver cufflinks caught the light every time he raised his glass. His words carried the same shine, sharp, polished, but cold. He leaned back in his chair, surveying the table, and then his gaze landed on me. "Tell me," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "How's that little hobby of yours? That tiny business? Do you still run it from that shoebox you call an office?" Laughter rippled down the table. My wife's sister giggled. My mother-in-law smirked. Even some of the business associates, eager to stay in Richard's good graces, chuckled politely. Then Richard delivered the final blow. "My daughter deserves better. Honestly, she's my biggest mistake for marrying down." My wife's hand tightened around her wine glass, but she didn't say a word. Before I could respond, a man at the far end of the table, one of Richard's prized clients, pushed back his chair and stood. His voice cut through the laughter. "Actually," he said, his tone steady, "that so-called tiny business belongs to my son." The room fell into stunned silence. Richard's face drained of color. I smiled, leaned forward, and said softly, "You really had no idea, did you?" Chapter 2, The Reveal. The silence in the dining hall was suffocating. Forks hovered midair. Wine glasses trembled in nervous hands, and every eye darted between Richard and the man standing at the end of the table. That man was Charles Whitmore, one of Richard's biggest clients. A man whose contracts alone made up nearly a third of the company's yearly revenue. To Richard, Charles wasn't just a client. He was practically untouchable. Charles adjusted his jacket, his eyes locked on Richard. "I didn't realize you spoke so casually about your son-in-law," he said, his voice cutting. "Especially when his company has been running half of my private investment portfolio for the last 3 years. A ripple of whispers spread down the table. Richard blinked, confused. "What? What are you talking about?" Charles turned to me and gave the smallest nod of respect. Tell him what you've built. I leaned back in my chair, calm and deliberate. That shoebox office. It was just the start. We now manage assets in real estate, logistics, and tech ventures, including 3 subsidiaries your company's departments rely on without even knowing it. The color drained further from Richard's face. Charles added the finishing blow. In fact, Richard, I wouldn't even be doing business with your company if it weren't for him. You see, he's the one who vouched for you. Without him, my contracts vanish. The weight of those words sank like a stone. Guests exchanged shocked glances. My wife's sister's smirk collapsed. Even my wife looked stunned. And Richard? His mouth opened, but no words came. I leaned in, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. You always assumed I was beneath you. But while you were laughing at my so-called tiny business, I was building something you can't afford to lose. The tension cracked like glass. The mighty CEO had been exposed, and this was only the beginning. Chapter 3, Cracks in the Armor. Richard's fork clattered onto his plate. For a man who prided himself on control. His hands trembled as though someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. You manage what? He sputtered. His voice, once booming with arrogance, now sounded small. I didn't rush my reply. I wanted every word to sink in. Multiple companies, shells, subsidiaries, holding firms, the kind of structure your legal team could spend years untangling. While you were busy tearing me down, Richard, I built something with no reliance on your empire. In fact, I let the pause sharpen the silence. Your empire relies on me. The room erupted with whispers. Richard's wife tugged on his sleeve, her face pale. Is this true? You never said, he snapped. Quiet, but his voice cracked. Charles Whitmore wasn't finished. He leaned back, almost enjoying the spectacle. Richard, perhaps you should have checked who you were mocking before you called him your daughter's biggest mistake. Because if he pulls his contracts, half your investors will follow, and I'll be the first. That single sentence hit Richard harder than any punch. His jaw tightened, but he had no counter. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came hollow. Meanwhile, I let a smile play across my face. You wanted me out of your family, Richard, but you'll find it's not so easy to cut me out when my hand is on the lever that holds your empire steady. I picked up my glass, raised it slightly, and said, Here's to family dinners. They have a way of showing people's true worth. The toast was met with silence. And in that silence, Richard realized something he had never imagined. The man he mocked could dismantle him brick by brick, contract by contract. And I intended to do exactly that. Chapter 4, The Retaliation. The dinner ended in fractured silence. Richard didn't speak another word to me, but I could see the fury simmering in his bloodshot eyes. For a man who had built his reputation on dominance, being humiliated in his own domain was intolerable. I knew he wouldn't stay quiet. Men like Richard never did. 2 nights later, I got the first sign. A subtle one. One of my smaller contracts was suddenly under review due to a mysterious complaint. Then another client received an anonymous warning about unstable leadership in my firm. Richard was moving behind the scenes, trying to claw back his dignity. But what he didn't know was that I had prepared for this moment years ago. See, while he was too busy playing King of the Hill, I had learned patience. I had built redundancies, networks, and safeguards. And more importantly, I had something Richard didn't. The truth. The truth that his empire was rotting from the inside. His books weren't clean. He had been funneling money through overseas accounts, propping up failing ventures with shady loans, and quietly shifting liabilities to subsidiaries that could collapse at any time. And guess who had copies of those files? Me, because years ago, when I was still the small business joke at his family table, Richard had laughed as he handed me the grunt work of cleaning old financial records. He thought it was beneath him. He never considered that I might keep copies. Now his retaliation had given me the perfect excuse to bring them out. I picked up my phone and made a call. Charles, I said, I think it's time your board saw what Richard has been hiding. I'll forward everything. There was a long pause, then a chuckle. Son, you're about to turn a bruise into a broken jaw. And that's exactly what I intended. Chapter 5, The Collapse Begins. The boardroom smelled of tension and cologne. Richard sat at the head of the table, his tie knotted tight, trying to project the same dominance he'd always worn like armor. But the whispers had already started before I entered. Charles, my biggest client and now Richard's largest stakeholder, stood at the far end of the table with a folder under his arm. He gave me a subtle nod. Richard sneered when he saw me. This is a private meeting. You don't belong here. Charles cut him off, voice sharp. Oh, he belongs here more than you realize. Sit down, Richard. Richard's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. For once, he wasn't in control. I set down a laptop and connected it to the projector. The first slide appeared. Spreadsheets, transfers, account numbers, all with Richard's name tied to shell corporations and offshore havens. Gasps filled the room. One board member muttered, This could sink us. Richard slammed his fist on the table. This is taken out of context, fabricated. I pressed play on an audio file. Richard's own voice filled the room. Shift the losses into the Cayman accounts. The board will never see it. By the time they catch on, I'll have cashed out. Silence. Cold, devastating silence. His face drained of color. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally. None met his eyes. Charles leaned forward, his voice calm but merciless. You called my son a mistake. You mocked him at your table. Well, today, Richard, you've made your last mistake. Effective immediately, you're removed as CEO pending investigation. Richard shot to his feet, pointing at me with trembling rage. You did this to me. I smiled slow and steady. No, Richard, you did this to yourself. I just showed them who you really are. The board members began filing out, murmuring about police and auditors. Richard remained frozen, his empire crumbling in real time, and for the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. Chapter 6. Public downfall news doesn't stay behind boardroom doors. Within 48 hours, the headlines spread like wildfire. CEO under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Respected businessmen removed by emergency vote. The empire Richard had built on arrogance and intimidation crumbled under the weight of evidence. At the next family dinner, the same gilded dining room where he had once humiliated me. The atmosphere was ice cold. His wife whispered harshly, "How could you?" His daughter refused to look at him. Even my wife, who had long been torn between loyalty to her father and her love for me, sat in silence, her hands clenched. Richard tried to bluster, but every phone at the table buzzed with the same news. His face plastered across articles, his name dragged through the mud. And then came the moment that truly broke him. The very investors he had counted on, the ones he had courted with cigars and brandy, went public, declaring their full support for Charles and his son's small business, which was now formally merging into their global network. Richard's company finished. Mine elevated overnight into something far greater than I had ever dreamed. Chapter 7, Poetic Justice. Weeks later, I stood on a stage at a charity gala, speaking not as the nobody son-in-law Richard once mocked, but as a partner in one of the most influential ventures in the country. Applause thundered through the hall. From the shadows, I caught sight of Richard, hollow-eyed, alone. A man who once commanded fear, now reduced to whispers and shame. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth, maybe to curse me, maybe to beg. I simply raised my glass in a slow, deliberate toast. The same gesture I had given him the night he called me pathetic, only this time the entire room clapped for me. Not him. Epilogue, the lesson. In the quiet that followed, I reflected on what had happened. Revenge wasn't just about humiliation or payback. It was about balance. About reminding the arrogant that no empire built on cruelty can last forever. Richard had mocked my small business, sneered at my worth, and underestimated me at every turn. But in the end, he destroyed himself. I only turned the spotlight on his sins. And the sweetest victory, I didn't just win. I built something my son could one day inherit with pride. Because real power isn't in tearing others down. It's in rising above them and making sure they never forget the day they tried to bury you. Was this revenge perfectly justified?